Hello students, this is your English lesson. Today we will read unit number 20 from Oxford Reading Circle, book 7. So we start our lesson. This is page number 192 from your book and the title of the unit is Oliver Twist. For the next 8 or 10 months, Oliver was the victim of a systematic course of treachery, cheating and deception. Deception means the action of deceiving someone. He was brought up by hand, the hungry and destitute. Destitute means deprived situation of the infant orphan was duly reported by the workhouse authorities to the parish authorities. Parish, a small administrative district. The parish authorities inquired with dignity of the workhouse authorities whether there was no female then domiciled in the house who was in a situation to impart to Oliver Twist the consolation and nourishment of which he stood in need. The workhouse authorities replied with humility that there was not. Upon this, the parish authorities resolved that Oliver should be dispatched to a branch workhouse some 3 miles off, where 20 or 30 other juvenile 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 young or teenager offenders rolled about the floor all day without the inconvenience of too much food or too much clothing under the parental superintendent. Superintendent mean the management superintendence of an elderly female who received the culprits of the consideration of 7 pence half penny per small head per week. Here culprits means a person who is responsible for a crime. The elderly female was a woman of wisdom and experience. She knew what was good for children and what was good for herself. So she appreciated the greater part of the weekly stipend to her own use. Stipend is a fixed regular sum paid as a salary. The board made periodical visits to the home and always sent the beadle the day before to say they were going. The children were neat and clean to behold when they went. Oliver Twist's ninth birthday found him a pale, thin child, decidedly small in circumference, circumference in width, but nature or inheritance had implanted a good, sturdy spirit in Oliver's breast. Implanted, fix, or insert. Sturdy, a person strongly built. It had plenty of room to expand thanks to the spare diet of the establishment, and perhaps to this circumstance may be attributed his having any ninth birthday at all. It was his ninth birthday, and he was keeping it in the coal cellar with two other young gentlemen who, after participating with him in a sound thrashing, had been locked up for presuming to be hungry when Mrs. Mann, the good lady of the house, was unexpectedly startled by the sight of Mr. Bumble the beadle entering the garden gate. Beadle, a minor parish official, once employed in the Church of England to assure and keep order. Goodness gracious, is that you, Mr. Bumble, sir? Said Mrs. Mann, thrusting her head out of the window in well affected ecstasy of joy. Ecstasy? Ecstasies of joy mean a state of extreme joy. Susan, take Oliver and them two brats upstairs. Brats, ill mannered, annoying child, and or here we can say children, and wash him directly. My heart alive, Mr. Bumble, how glad I am to see you. Mr. Bumble was a fat man and a choleric, choleric, choleric irritable. So he gave the little gate a tremendous kick, which could have emanated from no leg but a beadle's emanated flow. Lo, only think, said Mrs. Mann, running out, for the three boys had been removed by this time, that I should have forgotten that the gate was bolted on the inside. Walk in, sir, walk in, pray, Mr. Bumble, do, sir. Although this invitation was accompanied with a courtesy, it by no means mollified the beadle. Mollified, soothed. Do you think this respectful or proper conduct, Mrs. Mann? Inquired Mr. Bumble, grasping his cane, to keep the parish officers waiting at your garden gate. I was only telling one or two of the dear children as is so fond of you that it was you are coming, replied Mrs. Mann with great humility. Mr. Bumble had a great idea of his oratorical powers, oratorical skillful powers, and his importance. Well, well, Mrs. Mann, he replied in a calmer tone, it may be as you say. Lead the way in, Mrs. Mann, for I come on business and have something to say. Mrs. Mann ushered the beadle into a small parlor. Usher, show or guide someone, placed a seat for him, and deposited his hat and cane on the table before him. Mr. Bumble wiped the perspiration from his forehead and smiled. And now about business, said the beadle, taking out a leathern pocket book. The child that was half baptized to cleanse spiritually. Oliver Twist is 9 today. Bless him, interposed Mrs. Mann. Interposed to put yourself between two things, inflaming her left eye with the corner of her apron, and notwithstanding an offered reward of £10, which was afterwards increased to £20, we have never been able to discover who is his father or what was his mother's settlement, name, or condition. Mrs. Mann raised her hands in astonishment, but added, after a month's reflection, How how comes he to have any name at all then? The beadle drew himself up with great pride and said, invented it. You, Mr. Bumble? I, Mrs. Mann. We name our foundlings in alphabetical order. The last was a S. Swabble. I named him. This was a T twist. The next one will be Onwin, and the next Wilkins. I have got names ready made to the end of the alphabet and all the way through it again. Why, you are quite a literary character, sir, said Mrs. Mann. Well, well, said the beadle, evidently thankful with the compliment. Perhaps I may be, Mrs. Mann. Oliver, being now too old to remain here, the board has determined to have him back into the house. I have come out myself to take him there, so let me see him at once. I will fetch him directly, said Mrs. Mann, leaving the room. Oliver, having had by this time as much of the outer coat of dirt which encrusted his face and hands, removed as could be scrubbed off, rubbed something hard in one washing, was led into the room by Mrs. Mann. Make a bow to the gentleman, Oliver, said Mrs. Mann. Oliver made a bow, which was divided between the beadle on the chair and the hat on the table. Will you go along with me, Oliver? Said Mr. Bumble in a majestic voice. Oliver was about to say that he would go along with anybody with great readiness, when glancing upward he caught sight of Mrs. Mann, who had got behind the beadle's chair and was shaking her fist at him. He took the hint at once, for the fist had been too often impressed upon his body not to be deeply impressed upon his recollection. "Will she go with me?" inquired poor Oliver. "No, she can't," replied Mr. Bumble, "but she will come and see you sometimes." This was no very great consolation to the child. Young as he was, however, he had sense enough to make a feint of feeling great regret at going away. It was no very difficult matter for the boy to call tears into his eyes. Hunger and recent ill usage are great assistants if you want to cry, and Oliver cried very naturally indeed. Mrs. Mann gave him 1,000 embraces, and what Oliver wanted a great deal more, a piece of bread and butter, lest he should seem too hungry when he got to the workhouse with the slice of bread in his hand and the little brown cloth parish cap on his head. Oliver was then led away by Mr. Bumble from the wretched home where one kind word or look had never lighted the gloom of his infant years, and yet he burst into an agony of childish grief, agony, extreme mental suffering, as the gate closed after him. Wretched in a miserable condition as were the little companions in misery he was leaving behind. They were the only friends he had ever known, and a sense of his loneliness in the great wide world sank his heart for the first time. Mr. Bumble walked on with long strides. Little Oliver trotted beside him, trotted run, inquiring at the end of every quarter of a mile whether they were nearly there. To these interrogations, Mr. Bumble returned very brief and snappish replies. Interrogation interrogation, the process of asking a lot of questions, and snappish means irritable. Oliver had not been in the workhouse a quarter of an hour when Mr. Bumble, who had handed him over to the care of an old woman, returned, and telling him it was the board night, informed him that the board had said he was to appear before it forthwith. Not having a very clearly defined notion of what a live bored was, Oliver was not quite certain whether he ought to laugh or cry. He had no time to think about the matter, however, for Mr. Bumble gave him a tap on the head with his cane to wake him up and another on the back to make him lively, and conducted him into a large whitewashed room where 8 or 10 fat gentlemen were sitting round a table. At the top of the table, seated in an armchair rather higher than the rest, was a particularly fat gentleman with a very round red face. "Go to the board," said Bumble. Oliver brushed away 2 or 3 chairs and bowed. "What's your name, boy?" said the gentleman in the high chair. Oliver trembled at the sight of so many gentlemen, and the beadle gave him another tap behind, which made him cry. This made him answer in a very low and hesitating voice, whereupon a gentleman in a white waistcoat said he was a fool, which was a capital way of raising his spirits and putting him quite at his ease. "Boy," said the gentleman in the high chair, "listen to me. You know you are an orphan, I suppose." "What's that, sir?" inquired poor Oliver. "The boy is a fool. I thought he was," said the gentleman in the white waistcoat. "Hush," said the gentleman who had spoken first. "You know you have got no father or mother, and that you were brought up by the parish, don't you?" "Yes, sir," replied Oliver, weeping bitterly. "What are you crying for?" inquired the gentleman in the white waistcoat. "I hope you say your prayers every night," said another gentleman in a gruff voice, gruff of a voice, rough and low in pitch, "and pray for the people who feed you and take care of you." "Yes, sir," stammered the boy. "Well, you have come here to be educated and taught a useful trade," said the red faced gentleman in the high chair. "So you will begin to pick "Oh, come tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock," added the surly one in the white waistcoat. Oliver bowed low by the direction of the beadle and was then hurried away to be a large ward where, on a rough, hard bed, he sobbed himself to sleep. The room in which the boys were fed was a large stone hall with a copper at one end, out of which the master, dressed in an apron for the purpose and assisted by one or two women, ladled the gruel at meal times. Of this festival composition, each boy had one lad, ladleful and no more, except on occasions of great public rejoicing, when he had 2 ounces and a quarter of bread besides. The balls never wanted washing. The boys polished them with their spoons till they shone again, and when they had performed this operation, they would sit staring at the copper with such eager eyes as if they could have devoured the very bricks. Devoured, eat hungrily or quickly. Of each it was composed. Boys have generally excellent appetites. Oliver Twist and his companions suffered the tortures of slow starvation for 3 months. At last they got so wild with hunger that one boy hinted darkly to his companions that unless he had another basin of gruel each day, he was afraid he might some night happen to eat he was afraid he might some night happen to eat the boy who slept next to him. He had a wild, hungry eye, and they believed him. A council was held. Lots were cast. We should walk up to the master after supper that evening and ask for more. And it fell to Oliver Twist. The evening arrived. The boys took their places. The master, in his cook's uniforms, stationed himself at the copper. His proper assistants ranged themselves behind him. The gruel was served out and a long grace was said. The gruel disappeared. The boys whispered to each other and winked at Oliver while his next neighbors nudged him. Child as he was desperate with hunger and reckless with misery. He rose from the table and advancing to the master, basin and spoon in hand, said, "Please, sir, I want some more." The master was a fat, healthy man, but he turned very pale. He gazed in stupefied astonishment on the small rabble for some seconds and then clung for support to the copper. The assistants were paralyzed with wonder, the boys with fear. "What?" said the master at length in a faint voice. "Please, sir," replied Oliver, "I want some more." The master aimed a blow at Oliver's head with a ladle, pinioned him in his arms, and shrieked aloud for the beadle. The board were sitting in solemn meeting when Mr. Bumble rushed into the room in great excitement and addressing the gentleman in the high chair said, "Mr. Limkins, I beg your pardon, sir. Oliver Twist has asked for more." There was a general start. Horror was depicted on every face. "For more?" said Mr. Limkins. "Do I understand that he asked for more after he had eaten supper?" "He did, sir," replied Bumble. "That boy will be hung," said the gentleman in the white waistcoat. "I know that boy will be hung." Exercises A. Questions 1. What do you think the author means by the first two sentences of the passage? Answer. This means that Oliver was deceived and treated badly by the entire system of parish workhouse caregivers or caregiver. 2. What did the parish authorities resolve to do? Answer. The parish authorities resolved to send Oliver to a branch workhouse some 3 miles away where he would be under the care of an elderly female. 3. How was Mrs. Mann devised? Give 3 examples. Mrs. Mann was Device because she took most of the money that the parish paid her for looking after the boys. She was clever enough to make sure the boy or the boys were presentable when a board member made his periodical visit. She threatened Oliver with her fist behind Mr. Bumble's back so that he wouldn't seem too keen to leave her establishment. 4. What kind of man was Mr. Bumble? Answer. Mr. Bumble was a fat, short tempered man who had a great deal of self importance. He also thought that he had great oratory skills. 5. Was Mr. Bumble a good orator? Answer. No, Mr. Bumble was not really a good orator. He only thought that he was a good one. 6. Why was Oliver in a way unhappy to leave the home? Answer. Oliver was sad to leave the home because he was leaving behind the only friends he had ever known, and he thought that he was all alone in this world, added to his misery. 7. How were the boys in the home treated? Give examples from the text. Answer. The boys were fed only one ladleful of thin gruel at meal times. They were given a second serving only on occasions of great public rejoicing. 8. Who, in your opinion, is the worst character in this story? Give reasons for your answer. Answer. In my opinion, Mr. Bumble is the worst character in the story because he is cruel to the Oliver, uh, cruel to Oliver and other boys at the orphanage. He does not give them enough food and does not take good care of them. B. Reference to context. Read these lines from the story, then answer the questions. 1. The next one will be Unwin and the next Wilkins. A. Who says these words and to whom? Answer. Mr. Bumble says these words to Mrs. Mann. B. What has the speaker been boasting about? Answer. He was boasting that he named the foundlings that came to him in an alphabetical order. With great pride, he said that he invented the name Oliver Twist in the order of names like Swabble, Twist, Unwin, Wilkins. C. What response is given to this statement about names and what was the effect on the speaker? Answer. Mrs. Mann remarked and called him a literary character. He was gratified by her compliment and responded, "Perhaps I may be." 2. Oliver bowed low by the direction of the beadle and was then hurried away to a large ward where, on a rough, hard bed, he sobbed himself to sleep. A. Where is Oliver at this time? Answer. Oliver is in the presence of a board of 8 to 10 fat gentlemen sitting around a table in a large whitewashed room. B. What has he just been told and by whom? Answer. He is told by the red faced gentleman in the high chair that he has been brought there to be taught a useful trade and that he would begin to pick up oakum from 6 o'clock the following morning. C. Why is he upset? Answer. He is upset because he knows that he would have to sleep a rough, hard bed and the food given to them is meager, just a ladleful of gruel at every meal. Hunger, memories of ill usage, leaving the only home he has known since childhood, all make him want to cry. He is aware that life would be torturous. C. Words and meaning. 1. Are most of the sentences in the passage long or short? Which is the longest sentence? Answer. Some sentences in the lesson are short, some are very long. The longest one is, upon this, the parish authorities resolved that Oliver should be dispatched to a branch workhouse some 3 miles off, where 20 or 30 other juvenile offenders rolled about the floor all day. without the inconvenience of too much food or too much clothing under the parental superintendent superintendence of an elderly female who received the culprits for the consideration of 7 pence halfpenny per small head per week. 2. What is meant by the following? A. Well affected ecstasies of joy. Answer is pretended to be full of joy. B. It by no means mollified the beadle. Answer, it did not appease or soothe the beadle. C. He had sense enough to make a feint of feeling great regret at going away. Answer, he had enough sense to pretend to be sad at going away. D. And notwithstanding an offered reward of £10. Answer, in spite of offering a fair amount of £10 in exchange for. E. Mr. Bumble had a great idea of his oratorical powers and his importance. Answer, Mr. Bumble had tremendous belief in his public speaking ability and his value and significance. F. This was no very great consolation to the child. Answer, this was not much of a comfort for the child after his loss and disappointment. 3. The following have some connection with time. What are they? A. Weekend. B. Monthly. C. Century. D. Millennium. E. Fortnight. F. Saturday. D. Discuss and write. 1. Discuss the kind of life Oliver and the other boys might have led in the home, the orphanage, and later in the workhouse. What might their duties have been? What were the people in charge like? Oliver Twist, an orphanage, spends much of his childhood at orphanage with too many children and too little food. His life in the workhouse is lonely and sad. Oliver becomes an apprentice for an undertaker but runs away after he gets into a fight with another apprentice. 2. You have been sent to a workhouse. Write a short account, perhaps like an entry in a diary, of how you spend a typical day. Answer. As I spent a whole day in workhouse, I saw the young and old as well as men and women were made to work hard, often doing unpleasant jobs. Children could be seen there to work in factories or mines. The food was tasteless and in limited amount. Most of the people shared their beds. Teachers were also cruel.
Thanks for listening. For new videos, don't forget to subscribe my channel. And if you like my videos, please share and like.